Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have a lawmaker on the program today who has some issues with school strikes, and we'll hear from him and also on what we should do with Marcellus Shale, and then a duo of the state's leading reporters will do what? Catch us up on what's going on in the state capitol. You won't believe this. Pennsylvania politics and government in depth and in detail, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. There are lots going on in Harrisburg. We have a Bucks County lawmaker, Steve Santarsiero. Do I got that right?
Santarsiero.
Santarsiero. You see, I'm Italian. He's Italian. Part of him is Italian. We'll get that all out. Well, look, great to have you on the program.
It's great to be here, Terry. Thank
all right.
you.
Now, if I understand this right, in your school, in one of your school districts, or maybe more in Bucks County, you're having this strike problem with school teachers, local school districts. You have become increasingly concerned about that, and you have introduced legislation that would modify the state's collective bargaining law and end the right of teachers to strike, giving them an alternative. Am I right so far?
Yes, that's
all right.
That's
why don't
correct.
you explain a little bit about what your bill would do?
Sure. Let me first give you the background. The school district is the one my kids go to, had a strike back in '05. And right now they're working on the old contract for the last year, which expired at the end of June of last year. What my bill would do would actually require the parties to start negotiating earlier, would create 4 distinct phases of negotiation leading up to non-binding arbitration. And then if they hadn't settled by that point that the arbitration panel actually renders its decision, would apply pressure on both sides, the teachers and the school district, to reach a settlement, either accepting the arbitration decision or a settlement on their own.
Now, would this be, so in other words, they would make their case, are you saying to an arbitrator that would be binding on both the school district and the school board, let's say, or the teachers, PSEA, I would presume, who represents your teachers, and the school board?
Right. No,
go ahead.
It can't be binding under state law. State law only allows for binding arbitration in the context of firefighter and police, emergency services.
So you're not suggesting that strikes end completely?
Well, let me explain exactly how it works. They go through the 4 phases: negotiation, fact-finding, mediation, and arbitration. If they go all that time through those 4 phases and have not been able to settle on their own, the arbitration panel renders a decision. If at the point of that decision the teachers don't accept it or otherwise don't settle, they then lose the right to strike for the remainder of the dispute. If the school board doesn't accept it or otherwise settle, their state funding is held by the treasurer until such time as a deal is done, and then it's released.
Now, just thinking about that, I mean, you're Don Quixote here, I would think, on this bill. I get your point. I mean, right. I think we all understand the intention of it, but the school boards, they can't be wild about potentially losing their funding.
Well, it's not.
And the teachers, about giving up that right. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, neither side is wild about the idea, and that usually means that it's a good idea. I get it. My past life as a lawyer, I mediated a number of cases, and I can tell you when the parties are so intransigent, they usually are at a point where you have to put pressure on them, and typically the best deal is the one that no one is really happy with, because that suggests that it's fair. But I want to make it clear, what we're talking about with respect to the school boards is not losing the funding. It's simply holding it back until a deal is done. And for most school districts, and we found this out back in 2009 when the budget impasse lasted into the fall, they can go anywhere from 6 to 7 months without the state funding before it really starts to become an issue. Right. So what this does is it gives them this time, as the pressure is building on them and on the teachers, because they no longer now have the right to strike, to get the deal done and to stop posturing. And I think that's what you need. Yeah,
strikes itself, are not nearly as plentiful since they put that 100 in a school code. Right. The 180-day requirement, where I guess the longest you usually get a school strike is about 2 weeks, and then they're forced back in order to complete the school year.
Right.
But let me ask you another question. Did you consider what some critics of Act 195 have thought about, which is final offer, binding arbitration, where each side would put an offer on and you got to live with whatever you put up finally.
Right.
You think that's too much tilting at windmills, and that would have a difficult time passing?
Well, I think this is for a couple of points. Number one, I think there's a constitutional problem with doing it that way. I think we'd have to amend the Constitution in Pennsylvania.
No doubt. Yeah.
But secondly, even if that were not the case, I think this approach might be better because it still leaves open the possibility that the two sides can come up with their own deal.
Okay.
But it puts pressure on them to either accept the arbitration deal or to do their own deal. Now, if I may, just add one thing to it. This process is, it starts much earlier than the current process, and it has these distinct phases that I hope would actually result in a deal even before you get to the arbitration phase.
All right, before I let you go, Marcellus Shale is currently a huge issue before the legislature. We don't know if it will be resolved by this show's airing over the weekend. We're taping this on Thursday. But tell me, you're in favor of both a severance tax and an impact fee, yes or no?
I am. I'd prefer to see the severance tax, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to get bogged down in the terminology. But it has to be a reasonable one, and it has to be one that will fund environmental protection in the state as well as remediate problems.
Now let me ask you one other. You also have concern about drilling on state lands, right?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I do.
What's that concern?
Well, I want to maintain the current moratorium on any additional drilling in our state forests, and I want to look at what we can do to stop, if not mitigate, the effects of drilling in our state parks. And that's a slightly different issue because the mineral rights in those state park lands are actually privately held in most cases, not held by the state, so we have fewer levers at our disposal to stop that. But at a minimum, we have to stop the drilling in the state forests and then do what we can to mitigate the effects of drilling in the parks.
All right, well, thanks for coming on. You got an interesting position on how to handle the contract negotiations between school districts and teachers' unions. We'll see where it goes.
Okay.
All right, we have a duo of the state's leading reporters. Guess what? It wouldn't be a Pennsylvania Newsmakers if we didn't deal with what's going on in the state capitol. Budget, Marcellus Shale, photo ID. We'll see where we go. I never know. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. We're going to try, I have two of the state's leading journalists sitting across from me, Brad Bumsted with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and Laura Olson with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're all out west this week on the program. We were actually in the east earlier with the lawmaker. Can anyone figure out what's going on in Harrisburg? That's why you two are here. You're going to help us get through this morass. Now, as we tape this program, Brad, I'll start with you. As we tape this program, we don't know yet for sure by Sunday when it airs and over the weekend around the state that they will have done the budget, the state budget. Go through what's at issue as they try to resolve the budget of the state.
Okay, with the budget, the key issue is the spending level that was set by Governor Corbett back in March when he announced his budget. He said you have to come in at $27.3 billion or less.
Got it.
The previous budget was $28 billion. Of course, to put this all in a framework, the state faced a $4.2 billion deficit, largely as a result of the loss of federal stimulus funding. So they had to make cuts. Corbett's budget came in March with 50% cuts to the state-related and state-owned universities. The House Republicans restored some of that. The negotiating that's been taking place is to further restore some of that, and it looks like they may come in at about 15%.
All right, now let's continue this discussion. There's this plan to take the tobacco settlement money, about $380 million that's in the budget now, pull it out of the budget, which would, in theory, allow lawmakers to spend more but still stay under the $27.3 million. And
exactly.
Go ahead.
And that's where the spending number gets a little tricky, because does that number include the tobacco money, as the governor proposed doing in March in his budget, or as the lawmakers would prefer, and as it's historically been done? Those programs are separate. They're not subject to the negotiations and the whims of the budget process each year. And so can those be put aside into their kind of protected spending accounts?
Not in the general fund, not in the which would allow them to use some of the $550 million surplus we'll have, spend more to do what Brad suggested they want to do, reduce.
So those will probably be set aside, and we'll be spending somewhere around $27.149 billion.
Is that I called that a budget gimmick, and somebody took issue with me. Is that a little gimmickry, or
it depends how you look at it. It seems to me that it's the kind of thing that the governor initially said that he didn't want to do, shifting funds around, bringing more money in. But Corbett said this week in Lancaster that he basically doesn't care how they do it, as long as they come in at $27.3 billion or less.
So you think on that issue he'd be willing to buy using some of the surplus? Now, he originally wanted to use all of the surplus, divide it. Rainy day fund part, and then put what they call pay down the debt the state has, which is about $1 billion in interest, to pay for all the borrowing that was done for the economic and community development spending.
That's one of the things that's at issue, because in order to, once you move those tobacco funds away, then how much of that can you fill back in so that you can add some money back to education? Can you add some money back to welfare? Because one of the things the administration is concerned about is if you cut welfare spending by $300 million or so, as the House has talked about and as that number's fluctuated during negotiations, some of those programs are mandated, and they're not certain they can make that level of cuts, because they have to provide a certain level of services.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to get into what is really a contentious issue, and that's this whole business of what to do with Marcellus Shale. We'll get into that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Brad Bumsted and Laura Olson, both reporters. We're chatting about the situation leading up to the resolution of the budget, hopefully by June 30. Laura, I started with Brad before. Let me start with you. Marcellus Shale, somehow, some way, it's at the center of whatever gets done. If it gets done by the airing of this program, it will be only because they worked some deal out with Marcellus Shale. Well, what are the angles here?
Well, for months now, Senate President Pro Tem Joe Scarnati has been saying we need to have an impact fee involved in this budget. There are impacts out there. My constituents are upset. Yeah. Their roads are being
and he represents a huge area where there's a lot of shale going on.
Yeah,
right?
He's out in
guys?
north
drilling
central.
not far from his house.
Not far from his house?
Yeah, he told me that once.
Out in Jefferson County, around the Brockway Reservoir, we've heard about it. And so he wants an impact fee included. Governor Corbett has said, no, I want you guys to wait to consider any sort of drilling fee until after my Marcellus Shale Advisory Commission issues its report on July 22nd. They're supposed to be looking at impacts, changes to regulations, environmental concerns, this whole comprehensive package. He thinks it'd be better to, let's talk about what the impacts are, then let's form a fee.
All right, now, Brad, the governor has been on record during the course of the campaign, no tax, severance tax, I mean at the wellhead, no impact fee, nothing. He may get a way out. He may provide Governor Corbett, the commission that Laura points out, may provide a way out. But here's my question to you. There are, particularly over in the Senate Republicans want an impact fee now, particularly many in the leadership. Is that correct?
That is correct, and particularly southeastern Republican senators who are concerned about issues of open space and environmental degradation from the pipelines, even though there are no wells in that area. Right. And they want to put funding into growing greener and environmental programs like that. So the key issue is going to be, even after the budget passes, they have to pass something called the fiscal code, which sets the tax rates. And people are lining up with amendments on Marcellus Shale impact fee and taxes to the fiscal code. And Democrats are going to forge ahead with this, and they believe they can get support from Southeast Republicans to pass something.
So even though, Laura, even though Republicans control both chambers and the governorship, if this gets dicey and Republicans lose votes, the Democrats and some Republicans could form a coalition. In other words, to perhaps, well, the governor's likely to veto it. But
well, and so instead of trying to push to get their bill brought up on the floor, they're saying, you know, we'll just, when you bring up this bill, we'll add our plan in as an amendment. And we've seen this plethora of plans pop up in the last couple of weeks, where even Senate Majority Leader Dominic Pileggi, a Southeastern Republican, has introduced his own severance tax plan. And so we've seen this kind of progression.
The governor said, no way, no how, right? I mean, that would not, Brad, even be in the commission report, I would suspect.
Yeah. Kevin Harley, the governor's spokesman, told me an impact tax will be vetoed.
Yep, I thought so.
Now, in terms of a fee, that's a different story. They may be able to negotiate.
All right, let's run to a break. I want to talk about this issue of photo IDs. They passed before. Governor Rendell, you know, we go to vote, we have to show some proof. I want to get in it. That's a pretty big deal. We already, first-time voters have to provide identification. I don't think it's a state ID, am I right? It could be almost anything that shows your residence.
Right.
But now there's a lawmaker from Western PA that's pushing a bill, it's likely to pass, at least the House, about requiring all of us to take a state ID or some kind of identification when we vote for the first time. We'll talk about that and some other issues when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back. We're talking about all things Harrisburg, meaning the state capital, with Brad Bumsted and Laura Olson. All right. Let's turn to this photo ID. I mean, I think Governor Rendell, if you'll correct me, vetoed a bill that passed somewhat similar to this a couple of years ago.
2006.
In 06. Laura, what's this photo ID bill contain? What?
Daryl Metcalf, a representative from out in Butler County, wants to, he chairs the state government committee, and so he wants to require that anyone who goes to the polls has to show a state or federally issued photo ID. And if
Not
you
my
don't,
driver's license?
Your driver's license counts.
That's state.
It has to have a photo ID, and it has to be government official. It can't just be a student ID. And so if you don't have one of those, he says that the state will provide one for you at no cost.
What's wrong with a student ID with a picture, Brad? Come on.
Has to be government issued.
He's discriminating against you college professors.
So F&M, so they're discriminating against F&M students and F&M professors.
But Democrats
it would be too easy to forge if one were interested in fraud.
That's a whole other issue.
I know you are. All right, we're here. Okay. It passed before. What do you think?
Well, it'll pass the House without any question. Whether the Senate is interested in this remains to be seen. I was told this week that they may take it up in the fall.
Not a high priority.
No, I mean, this is something that's brought up a lot of debate as there's been some closed-door meetings with leadership on so the House floor has been very busy discussing this, but it's unlikely to
One interesting aspect of it is that Republican majorities in legislatures across the country have been taking up this kind of bill, and it's viewed, rightly or wrongly, as a partisan thing that Republicans are trying to keep Democrats out of the poll, i.e. minorities and low-income people. Yeah. Democrats see Republicans establishing a hurdle to voting. Right. So we're not alone in this. It's been going on elsewhere.
Yeah, that's certainly. And it's this issue where Republicans will say it's all about fraud.
Yes.
And legitimacy of the right to vote. So you got these two situations. But, gee, I would think, I mean, how about if you're Millersville or Kutztown or Westchester a state-owned school and they have a state ID? One of you have to find that out about whether
we'll check with Darryl Metcalf on that
official
for you.
ID. That might work, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, they are going to issue IDs to people if you don't have, if all you have is a college ID, and it's going to cost about $10 million to do that.
And so the Democratic opponents shoot back and say, well, if you're a senior citizen, then you have to go to PennDOT before you have to go to the polls, and it puts one more step on the places you have to go on Election Day.
All right, at any rate, Brad, another interesting situation has occurred with this debate over who should do the law enforcement where the casinos are concerned. Should it be within the gaming board and gaming operation itself, or should it be, I guess, over in the Attorney General's office? Explain that situation for our viewers. Put the context in there.
Well, the House in March passed a bill that would move the Bureau of Investigations Enforcement to the Attorney General. It languished in the Senate. Senator Jane Earl had no real interest in moving that bill. So what happened in the meantime is that a grand jury report came out on gaming, and it really was a scathing report of how the gaming board had basically squelched various efforts by the investigative arm, BIE, into casino applications and licensing. That provided ammunition to the supporters of this. So this week, Representative Mike Vera, a Republican from Montgomery County, went after the money. And while his other bill is sitting in the Senate, he took the Gaming Control Board's budget, not to be confused with the state budget, it's done separately, and shifted $12 million out of it to the Attorney General. The Gaming Board says if the House and Senate can't reach agreement on this and it goes past the deadline, by mid-July they'll run out of money.
The whole operation of the Gaming Board will run out of money?
And yes, and that they would have to close casinos because they wouldn't have the oversight personnel, you know, in the casinos. So there's a lot at risk there.
Yeah. Is this going to pass? What's your sense of that?
Senator Earl has pushed back very hard on this, but this is an interesting turn to take the money out as kind of leverage to try and entice folks to actually work out some sort of compromise or an agreement.
It is leverage.
All right, we have about 30 seconds. I'm going to put both of them on the spot. When this airs, do we have a budget or not?
Yes. Just a budget.
Just a budget.
A handshake deal.
A handshake deal.
It's going to take next week to pass the bill.
So, yeah, they're procedurally and mechanically the way they need 3 days, you know. Like
general fund budget, but not the other stuff.
Okay.
The fiscal code debate will go on.
Laura gets a final word. All right, as always, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.